Morning everyone, Tractor 44 here. So far, part 1, 2, and 3, we've covered just the layout of plain vanilla flavored straight duct with no offsets or transitions. And then we've done some folding of that flat duct, making some duct halves. And then we traveled on making some transitions, just some simple transitions, square on one side and one way, just transition taper on one side. Today we're going to move on and build the plenum, the first box that goes off the top of the furnace, and then we're going to maybe even get started on the plenum T that takes the two trunk lines to the extremes of the house. The plenum is the very first piece of ductwork off of the top of the furnace that ties the furnace into its duct distribution network, so to speak. So the plenum is nothing more than a box that sits on top of the furnace that the main trunk line ties onto. So if you can kind of visualize this as one piece and assembled, this box here is actually the plenum. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll run that plenum box all the way up to an inch below the floor joist, and then they'll tap into the sides of those boxes with the respective trunk line going to the two ends of the house. So right now we're just going to concentrate on laying out this plenum. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out what the dimensions of, or the cut size of our material is. The furnace width is going to be, the furnace width is 20 by 16.5. So what we do is we add the 16.5 plus the 20 and add 1 inch for one Pittsburgh and a quarter inch 90 that goes into the other half of the plenum. So then we add those two together, and then the other dimension will be the height that we need it to be with the addition of the flange. I'm going to turn 1/2 inch flange out at 90 degrees, and to reinforce it, we'll bring it back in a 1/2 inch. So we call that like a 90-degree double hem flange. So I need 14 inch finished dimension plus the 1 inch for the double hem 1/2 inch flange. So our cut size is going to be the 16.5 plus the 20 plus the 1 1/4, whatever that is, by 15 inch in width. The cut size on them plenum halves turned out to be 37 3/4 by 15. Well, as my son-in-law pointed out, maybe somebody wants to see how you actually notch. You take this, where we're going to have that 90-degree fold all the way into the 1 inch mark, and then lop these guys off here. Now what I usually do, because of this reasonably large area on the plenum, and especially if the blower has a 3/4 horse motor in it like this one does, I'll cross break both sections, or all 4 sections of the plenum, just to minimize that oil canning. This particular case I'm not going to. I'm going to leave the smaller dimension, the front and the rear, flat, because remember, I think I said in the beginning, we're going to be tying this into tying a wood furnace into it with damperage, electrically turning back and forth. So I have to make sure that it's easy to install those dampers that we have to make. So by leaving these flat without putting a cross break in it, it'll be much easier to assemble those dampers in that plenum. Now I didn't say this is easy, it's just a little bit awkward at best. You take your 1/2 inch to the inside first and then latch it down. Then you invert it and take the 1 inch mark, which now has miraculously become only a 1/2 inch. There's 1/2 of your plenum. there's the second half of the plenum. So here's the two-piece plenum ready to assemble. Remember we said we wanted a 1/2-inch double hemmed reinforced flange. That makes it much stronger when you run your screws right into the top of the plenum. It doesn't kink real bad. And our nominal height should be really close to 14 inches. We're at 14 and about a 32nd. I'd say that's good enough. Here's our Pittsburgh. Here's our 1/4-inch tab. 1/4-inch tab will go into there. The other 1/4-inch tab goes into there. And there's the first section. All we have to do is bend our drive cleats on the short dimensions of the plenum, and it's ready to install. Remember a little earlier we were talking about building a plenum, which is this right here, in which we've just completed. We talked about going up into the main trunk line instead of just building a great big box that goes all the way up to the floor joist and then tapping into the two edges of the two sides of the box, and then just taking trunk line out of it. We were going to build a T fitting, and this is what we've come up with, is this right here. It's going to go straight up in there and then proportionally go both directions. Now in some cases I would go ahead and put a V-notch in here at a specific location to divert or direct more air this way, or put a set of dampers up in there to where you could actually throttle one end of the trunk line back to force a little bit more the other direction. This one here is not going to be necessary, and that'll come up in the future. But this is what we're going to lay out right now is essentially this T-looking fitting. And the first thing we're going to do is lay out the side as though it's drawn here. Use that as a pattern and cut the other side. Then we'll make the two inside wrappers, and then we'll put the top on it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to identify something to start with, and that's going to be our extremes. Now the height we got marked on the print is 10 inch, so the actual height's the cut size is going to be 10 plus a quarter for that 1/4 inch. So we put 10 inch plus a quarter, 10 1/4. So may as well go down here and mark 10 1/4 and 10. At this point we've got the top of the fitting identified, so we can go ahead and mark the cut line, because then we're going to cut it right here. That'll help us keep track of what we're actually doing in the layout too, by laying this and actually drawing in that cut line. So there's the top of our fitting. Hopefully you probably won't be able to see it, but we see here I've got marked a 4-inch throat. So we're going to drop down here 8 inches because that duct is 8 inches in height. So drop down off of that 8 inches from the inside of that, add a quarter to it for our 1/4 inch bend. Alright, that's the height of our duct going that direction. So we want a 4-inch throat, so we'll go in from here 4 inches, and we'll put a mark right here and take a 1/4 inch off of it, because that's what we need for the Pittsburgh. Take us a little tri-square because it's well within the confines of using a small square like this, and mark these two right here. Mark these two right here. Now we've got our throat, we've got our height, and we've got our trunk going that direction taken care of. So we know the width on this guy is 16 1/2 inches. So we go from the inside of here, 16 1/2 inches. Then what are we going to add? We're going to add a 1/4 inch to that 16 1/2, because we have to allow for the Pittsburgh. So we may as well mark that up here a couple of inches. So we identify that. We're going to come over here and we're going to mark down 8 inches, because that's the height of the trunk line going that way. And we're going to add a 1/4 inch to it. That's a little more difficult to do with that little bitty square, so we'll do it like this just for the heck of it. It was easier doing this than grabbing my T-square, which is all the way down there. We know now that from this dimension, this is the side of the duct going up. So we know from this dimension, we had a 4-inch throat, so we add 4 inches to this 16.5-inch dimension here. So we're going to add 4 inches right here. Then we're going to take 1 inch off of it for the S and drive. So, believe it or not, we succeeded in having our fitting laid out. And literally that quick, there is your cut pattern for the side of the T. So we're going to use this as a pattern, mark it out, and cut the second one out, and then we'll go about the business of making the inside wrappers and the top. So here it is, notched. This is the critical point. This is a critical point because that defines the height and the length or the depth or whatever you want to call it of your throat, where that fitting is going to go that direction. So we'll go to the break, fold that up, come back, and we're going to use a cheek bender to fold those inside radius. Now for measuring these wrappers, it's really easy, especially on the straight tops. You got your 1 inch scribe and your 1 inch scribe, so you get an accurate measurement between those two 1 inch scribes, which is 22.5 inch, add an inch, that's 24.5. So we're going to write up here 24.5 by whatever the width of the duct is, 20 inch plus 2, because there's a Pittsburgh on one side and on the other to accept these 1/4 inch bends. So the duct is 20, so that's 22. 24.5 by 22 will fabricate the top. Down here we know we had a 4 inch throat, so this is going to be 1 inch in to the inside mark is 3 plus the 1, so that's 4. Then down here you just have to measure this, whatever its wild dimension is, from that inside corner down to the 1 inch mark is 1.5 inches, so that's going to be 2.5. So that's going to be 4 plus 2.5 is 6.5 by 22. 20 inch width plus 2 for the two Pittsburghs. This should be reasonably close to the same. So you get in a habit of actually marking the numbers on the inside of the duct, simply because if you make a T that's not equal, it's different on this side here, the throat is going to be a different dimension over here. The height will probably be pretty close to the same unless the height of the duct changes, but you can definitely have different dimensions. So get in the habit of marking the insides. That way, again, it just eliminates more thought. So we're going to make 3 rough cuts, and then we'll be back. The shorter the pieces are running through the Pittsburgh or the lock forming machine, the more sketchy it is. Because you have to hold it really secure. Remember how the Pittsburgh lock goes, that 1/4 inch bend goes down inside this crack right here. Well, when this is a toe wrapper, it actually has to be bent backwards. So, and you'll see that whenever I match it up to the T, you'll see how those 1/4 inch bends require this to be bent backwards so that they'll fit down inside. This little tool here I bought brand new in 1984. It's got one purpose as far as I'm concerned. It's called it's actually a Lock Former brand, which is the same as that Pittsburgh machine. It's a Lock Former brand cheek bender. So stick it right inside here, and all it does is fold a 90-degree on that inside bend on a fitting like this right here. So there you go, right there. If you get those all wrinkly and crinkly, they don't want to drive into that Pittsburgh groove very easily. So you want to use a cheek bender if you can. If you can't, you can do them by hand. You can take a 4-inch folder, 4-inch folder, and kind of fold them up, and then you can tap them in place with a nice square block of steel. You can use that as an anvil and square that up. I'll show you how to do that actually. Use a small hammer and just right up against there, and you can just tap it right up against that squared block. It's got to be a good squared block. That gives you a good sharp 90-degree bend. So here's the two side pieces of the duct, completely farmed up with the drive tab on the 8-inch trunk line, and on the plenum edge, the 16.5 inch plenum edge coming up, and the 8-inch trunk line going the other direction. So both of them are done, and now we're ready for the toe wrappers, or these wrappers in here, and the top. So anyway, this afternoon in part 4 of the series, you got to see a couple of, halfway decent things. We started off building a plenum, and then we came off that plenum and built that T, that takes the two trunk lines to the opposing ends of the basement, and kind of got to see how that's laid out. And you can see it's not extremely difficult. You just got to think about what you're doing. That's all there are to it. It's not that hard. Like I always say, if that's hard, I wouldn't be able to do it. But at any rate, you got to see a new little machine, or a tool, that cheek bender. Cheek bender's a pretty handy little guy. It's kind of not so great for these little 2 and 3 and 4 inch 90-degree bends. They're just as quick to do by hand and just as good. But where they come into play is when that 90 is 14, 16, 18, up to 24 inches in length, because that's when it's really critical that bend be perfectly straight, because it's very difficult to get a wiggly jiggly 1/4 inch thing lined up and in that tight old Pittsburgh lock. But at any rate, this is a step in the right direction today, but it's not extremely difficult. We got some really cool stuff coming up, because the degree of difficulty does increase just a little bit. But at any rate, I think for now we'll call that an end to part 4. And I think this is Tractor Man 44, and I am out of here for the day.